Hey everyone, it's Froggy, and I'm back again with some more Will a Wonderful World. So let's just, we've got some new mails up in here.
하나님, 나를 도와주세요.
Oh, it's the kid!
부처님, 도대체 제가 뭘 어떻게 해야 되죠?
Shaking hands. Ah, let's do the kid! My dad had a bad temper. He often hit my mom and me. One day I knocked him out with a bottle to help Mom. I thought he would beat me up once he woke up. But I never expected that people from a mental hospital would show up at our door. These strangers were here to take me away. Mom was not at home. I could still hear the last word Dad ever said to me. Bastard. I was not ill. I was taken to the hospital because I was a bad child. However, everybody here would insist they were not ill. Besides, the male nurses here were all strong as bears. They could lift me off the ground with a single hand. There was no way I could escape from here. I was put in a very small room, alone. There was a desk and a chair and a simple bed. The sheets and blankets looked yellow and they were covered with stains. The walls were very dirty too, and someone had written a lot of bad words in the corner. I would try to talk with the female nurses just to get through the day. Soon I realized that as long as I kept saying nice things about them, they would tell me anything I wanted to know. I had learned from them that the hospital was not too far away from my home. They said that the president of the hospital was a relative of someone important in the government. That was how the hospital had received a lot of government funding, but the president had pocketed most of it for himself. They also said that the president was rarely here. The person who was really in charge was the vice president, Dr. Lee Yun-suk. Dr. Lee was an expert in his field, and he always looked out for the employees. If it weren't for him, the hospital would have closed down a long time ago. It was a Tuesday. I had been here for 2 days, but I hadn't seen one doctor yet. If I could have Dr. Lee examine me, maybe he would know that I wasn't really ill and let me go home. Around dinner time, I was waiting for the tray to be put through the door when it opened. A tall, slim male nurse stood at the door and said that he would take me to see the doctor. I'd never seen him before. He probably worked in another building. I followed him downstairs, across the garden, and into another building. We walked up to the 5th floor and stopped at the door of an office. The name tag on the door said Lee Young-suk. I sat nervously on the medical stool. It was very dark inside, and no lights were turned on. I could smell a faint scent in the room. It was only the two of us in the room. He asked a few simple questions first. To prove I was a good child, I answered all of the questions honestly. I also told him that Dad would beat Mom and me, and why I thought that I had been brought here. It was because Dad thought I was a bastard, a bad child. You are here because you have a condition called selective cognitive impairment. Dr. Lee took off his white coat and laid it on the back of his chair. Selective cognitive impairment? I had never heard of it. I could barely say it. In other words, you have a tendency to fantasize about events. For instance, you said that your father had choked your mother with a rope, but that never happened. That's not true. Dad must have lied to you. He beat me. He even poured boiling water on me. I can show you. I took off my shirt and turned my back towards him. I showed him the burn scars that went from my neck all the way to my back. That was what Dad had given me when he doused me with boiling water. Dr. Lee raised his hand and touched the scar with his fingertips. His hand was so cold that I took a deep breath. You are mistaken. It wasn't your father who did this to you. Your symptoms are quite severe. If we don't do something about... spelling bee, cool. If we don't do something about it, it might very likely turn into schizophrenia. I turned around and saw Dr. Lee untying his tie. That would be an even worse condition. People with the condition have to be tied down to their beds. They can't go outside, not even to the bathroom. Every day they need to go through electroconvulsive therapy. In more serious cases, we might even perform brain surgery on them. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm getting rapey vibes from the doctor. I was as soon as she entered the room and it was dark. And that is not how you treat schizophrenia. I've known a few people with schizophrenia. They're fine. They are not getting tied down to beds. Perhaps I was too frightened. I felt my entire body getting warm and my knees were becoming weak. Dr. Lee held me steady. Don't be afraid, kid. As long as you do everything I tell you, one day you will fully recover. Dr. Lee put his hands on my back, pushed me against his deck, and pulled down my pants. Oh, I don't like this. Horrible! He pressed himself against me and forced my legs open. I'm gonna put, warnings on this one, because this is not cool. I didn't want to stay, but for some reason I couldn't feel any strength in my arms or legs. I didn't know what he was going to do to me. I was so scared. Please, doctor, let me go. I could only beg him to let me go. He just laughed. Let you go? That's not going to happen. You're here because of a lot of money. Money? Suddenly, an excruciating, splitting pain washed over my entire body. My brain stopped thinking. I couldn't hear anything he said afterwards. All I could hear was some deafening buzzing noise in my ears. A full-length mirror was hung on the wall to the right side of the room. I could see two pale bodies lit by the moonlight in the reflection. I raised my hand, hoping that the smaller body in the reflection would turn out not to be me. But the person in the mirror, whose face was crying and twisting in pain and despair, slowly raised his hand too, just as I did. No. This excruciating pain shooting through my back thawed my fear as I started to resist. I struggled to move my arms around. I pushed the files on the desk away, and then I felt something. A gun. Dr. Lee was sweating heavily. He didn't notice what I was doing. I put my index finger on the trigger and raised the gun, shaking uncontrollably. I turned to my right. I pulled the trigger. The mirror suddenly shattered into pieces and scattered all over the floor. Dr. Lee was extremely shocked. He twisted the gun out of my hand and threw it onto the medical stool. A tall, slim nurse opened the door and peeked inside. But the moment he saw Dr. Lee shaking his head, he stepped back out again and closed the door. It was still just the two of us. Nothing had changed. Even though I had smashed the mirror and its reflected horrors to smithereens, nothing had changed. I saw numerous blue eyes in the broken pieces of the mirror. All of those eyes belonged to me. I was in the mirror. So who was the person that was outside of the mirror? I couldn't seem to recognize him. This yellow-haired and powerless child, who was he? Park Sang-gun. Oh, disgusting. I had finally seen a true marksman today. The custodian who loved soap operas so much that he would bawl his eyes out had averted Lieutenant Kang's crisis with just a toy gun. And it was from such a distance. Forget about it being a toy gun. Even with a real gun, it would be incredibly hard to hit the temple of your target. If I had gone on the mission by myself, everything would have been over by now. I hadn't realized that I couldn't shoot a gun until I enrolled in the police academy. Every time I tried to aim, I couldn't calm down and concentrate. No matter how hard I trained, I couldn't improve my shooting performance. The academy even sent me to a specialized psychologist, although we didn't find anything wrong. Unsurprisingly, I got a 0 in my final shooting test. I became the laughingstock of the class. If it weren't for my outstanding grades in the combat test convincing the academy to make an exception for me, I would probably still be wasting bullets in training. Guns must simply not agree with me. There couldn't be any other explanation. The custodian had gone back to the police station. All we needed to do was wait for the reinforcements from the station and clean up the mess. By the way, even though I wasn't good with them, I could still appreciate guns. I still thought that it would feel great if I could have one with me at all times. I was playing with a gun that I had just picked up off the ground. It must have belonged to one of these losers. When I was feeling a little drunk with the power in my hand, a stranger walked out of the shadows behind the cargo container. He was a huge, muscular man in his 40s or 50s. He was wounded, but both the tattoo on his bald head and the scars at the corner of his eyes were telling me that he would not be afraid to fight. I held the gun steady and pointed it at him when Lieutenant Kang casually said, "He's one of us." Lieutenant Kang was sitting on top of some passed-out lackey in a pink striped shirt. He was holding half a cigarette in his hand, and he had just exhaled a puff of murky white smoke. I was shocked. The person didn't look like a police officer at all. Well, I suppose they were all birds of a feather. Uniform must have plenty of weirdos like them. I lowered the gun, stood straight, and gave him a salute. "Sir, I'm Chang Jung-min. I was just assigned to Unit 4 a week ago. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Pleasure to meet you too." It wasn't the hulking officer who had responded. It was Choi Yo-han, who was standing behind him with a gun pushed up against his head. "Did you all think it was fucking over?" He held his gun against the officer's temple while rubbing his own bruised head with the other hand. Crap. I had somehow forgotten that he had only been shot by a toy gun. How could I have made such an idiotic mistake again? Lieutenant Kang slowly stood up too. His cigarette was still burning, but he had no interest in smoking it again. "Now those are the kinds of looks that I like. Kid, raise your gun." I wasn't sure what trick he was trying to play, but I involuntarily held onto it more firmly. "I'm giving you two choices. Your lieutenant or this meathead here. Use your gun to make your pick, put a bullet in his head, and then we're done. Don't play any tricks on me." "What?" I must have heard it wrong. I had never been trained for this scenario back at the academy. Choi Yo-han chuckled. "Oh, also, I'm the kind of person who doesn't have too much patience, so I'll give you 5 seconds. How about that? Let's begin the countdown. 5. I slowly raised the gun while my arms suddenly felt like they had been filled with lead. On one side, it was the senior officer whom I had just met. On the other side, it was Lieutenant Kang. What kind of a sick joke was this? I must calm down and think. There must be some other way. But I only had 5 seconds. 4. Lieutenant Kang was standing to my right. The cigarette in his hand had already burnt out. He was standing there completely motionless like a statue. Our eyes met in midair, but time kept flowing. My hands were shaking. 3. I pointed the gun at Choi Yo-han. I tried my best to aim at his forehead. Could I make the shot? 2. The officer looked at me calmly. He seemed to be telling me with his eyes, "I trust you." But I couldn't trust myself. 1. Huge drops of sweat were rolling down my face. No. I couldn't make it. I give up. The officer's head exploded right in front of my eyes. Then the gun barrel turned to me, with a sliver of smoke still creeping out of it. Choi pulled the trigger. The bullet hit me and knocked me over. Kang Bakya, how does it feel watching your men die in front of you, huh? I felt my eyelids getting heavier and heavier. I couldn't see the expression on Lieutenant Kang's face. The voice of Choi mocking and taunting the lieutenant was getting further and further away, too. A few weeks later, I woke up in the Busan Metropolitan Hospital. Tubes were coming out of every part of my body. The EKG machine was beeping steadily next to the bed. Captain Gong told me when he visited me that I was the only survivor from the warehouse. How could this have happened? Someone please tell me that this was all just a dream. Please, Buddha. They were all good people. Please help them. Chang Jung-min. Alright, let's give her a shot. Nope, it's not what I meant. Start! Because maybe we can hit the cigarette. We'll try that. 3. I pointed the gun at Lieutenant Kang. Was there really no other way? 2. Lieutenant Kang saw me pointing the gun at him. He didn't look like he blamed me. He seemed to be telling me with his eyes, I trust you. But I couldn't trust myself. 1. Huge drops of sweat were rolling down my face. No, I couldn't make it. I gave up. The officer's head exploded right in front of my eyes, and the gun barrel turned toward me. Okay, we've seen this. An enormous noise, louder than anything that I had ever heard, exploded from the gun. My entire arm felt numb after the shock, but I was still holding it in my hand. Then, I felt something warm and red dripping on my chest. Dr. Lee was still smiling, but there was a hole in the middle of his forehead. I pushed him away and sat back up. He fell on the floor with his face up. He still had a heart on. All of a sudden, there seemed to be a lot of people hanging out in the hallway outside. I could hear footsteps, conversations, even screams. Shut up. I came down from the desk and walked to the mirror with my ears covered. My body still looked pale in the moonlight, but now there were some red stripes on it. It reminded me of the warriors that I had seen in the movies. In Russia, did people paint themselves with red stripes too? A and bad, okay. Let's try this. So same thing. Alright. Okay, I did do that. Alright, retry. And then just move. Is there somewhere else I can slip these? No, eh? I still want you to pull the trigger. No, we need you to pull the trigger. Three. I pointed the gun at Lieutenant Kang. Choi Yo-han was not easy to fool. I had to choose the lieutenant in order to save the officer. As long as I didn't hit any critical spots, the lieutenant would be okay. I could also stall for a bit longer. 2. Lieutenant Kang saw me pointing the gun at him. He didn't look like he blamed me. I could see that he had understood that it was my plan to stall. 1. Huge drops of sweat were rolling down my face when I pulled the trigger. The bullet flew out of the barrel towards Lieutenant Kang and hit the man lying behind him. The lackey in the pink striped shirt grunted, and everything went quiet again. As expected of my terrible shooting, it just made things worse. How dare you try to trick me? Let me show you the consequences. Choi Yo-han pulled the trigger with his finger. The officer's head exploded right in front of my eyes, something pointed at me. If I killed him, I would become a murderer. Where would I be able to run if I became a murderer? I put down the gun. Tears of shame and pain streamed down my face. I decided that I would survive this. And then I swore to myself that I would find another chance. I swore. I didn't turn my head. I didn't close my eyes. I wanted to burn his evil face into my memory. Along with the man who sold me for money. What have you done to me? One day, I will pay you back plus extra. S on you, but not on you, eh? Alright. Let's try that. So I know I've got you. 3. Pointed the gun at Lieutenant Kang. It's not easy to fool. Okay, we did this. My hands were shaking like never before. It reminded me of the only time that I had ever hit inside the target. It was a very windy day, and I was wearing nothing but a tank top, so I had been trembling because of the cold. Now that I was shaking so hard, maybe there would be another miracle? 2! Lieutenant King saw me, pointed the gun at him. He didn't look like he blamed me. I could see that he understood my plan was to stall, but he didn't know that I was an extremely lousy shot. 1! Huge drops of sweat were rolling down my face when I pulled the trigger. The bullet flew out of the barrel and hit Lieutenant Kang in his left arm. I made it. I actually made the shot. However, Choi Yo-han was obviously not satisfied with the result. Kid, are you really such a terrible shot? Or are you just trying to fool me? I guess I'll have to teach you a lesson. He moved his gun away from the officer's temple and pointed it at his back. Bang! A red hole appeared in his stomach. The officer's face turned pale, but he didn't wince even a little, trying not to worry us. What a man he was. Oh, well, I'm also a pretty nice guy. How about I give you another chance? This time, aim at the head. See? Right here. He poked his gun at the officer's temple while laughing like a maniac. My anger was boiling inside me, and I couldn't listen to any more bullshit coming out from the butterface of that bastard. But what could I do? No matter how fast I could possibly move, I couldn't be faster than a bullet. A shadow leapt past me from behind while I was still trying to think. A splash of blood spilled to the floor inside my shadow, and that was cast by the dim lights. A gun was sticking out of Choi Han's mouth. No, it was barely a mouth at all. Barf. Choi's body was falling to the ground at the same speed as my vomit. Lieutenant Kang took the gun out of Choi's hand. There was no warmth in his eyes as he looked like someone else completely. The will to kill was radiating from him. The will to kill every single living thing in sight, even those that had been incapacitated. A minute later, those who had passed out in the warehouse would never wake up again. The officer was lying next to Choi Han's body, still bleeding. I couldn't tell if he was still breathing. Lieutenant Kang's eyes then turned to the only remaining person alive in the warehouse. He looked into my eyes. Then he raised his gun. Alright, well, there you go. Rank S, I guess. Oh, we finally got like a face on the oh, he's so cute though. Suffered from severe mental trauma due to a prolonged exposure to domestic violence during childhood. At 12, institutionalized in a mental hospital, diagnosed with selective cognitive impairment. I didn't like this episode. This episode was horrible. So I'm gonna end it. I hope you guys have a great day.